The algorithm flagged it at 3:47 in the morning. Not a hacker, not a system glitch. My own CEO's son-in-law had just attempted to transfer full ownership of the diagnostic AI I'd spent 11 years building, and the system did exactly what I designed it to do when someone tried to move it without my biometric confirmation. It locked everything. I was still in bed when my phone lit up. I didn't panic. I'd been waiting for something like this for about 8 months. Let me back up. I'm a medical software engineer. I spent most of my career in Toronto, working at a mid-sized health tech company called NovaMed Systems. We built diagnostic software for hospitals, AI-assisted tools that helped radiologists catch things the human eye misses at 2 a.m. on a 12-hour shift, lung nodules, early-stage bleeds, the kind of thing that, if you catch it on a Tuesday, the patient goes home by Friday. If you miss it, they don't. The core system, the one I'd architected from scratch, was called ARIA, Adaptive Radiological Intelligence Architecture. I know, the acronym was forced. My colleague at the time came up with it, and I never had the heart to say it sounded like a Disney princess. But ARIA worked. It worked better than anything else on the Canadian market, and by the time I was 44, we had licensing agreements with 14 hospital networks from Halifax to Vancouver. The patent was filed under joint ownership, NovaMed and myself, as named inventor. That's important. That joint ownership clause, and specifically Schedule C of the original agreement, is what saved everything in the end. Now the CEO, a man named Roger, who I genuinely respected for most of a decade, had been pulling back from operations for about 2 years. Health issues, I think, though nobody said it outright. In his place, more and more, was his son-in-law. His son-in-law had an MBA from Schulich. He wore it like a crown. He'd come into meetings and use words like scalability ecosystem and monetization architecture. And you could see the engineers in the room doing the same thing I was doing, staring at the table, waiting for it to end. He didn't understand the product. He didn't try to. What he understood was the org chart, and he'd spent 18 months quietly repositioning himself at the top of it. I'll call him the son-in-law, because that's really all he was. That's all that got him the job, all that gave him the authority he had, and all that will ever really define him in this story. He started with small things, restructuring the reporting lines so my team reported to his operations director instead of directly to Roger, moving the IP strategy meetings to slots he chaired, replacing 2 of my senior engineers with contractors he'd sourced through a firm his university friend ran. Each individual decision, if you squinted, had a business rationale you could almost accept. Together, they were a pattern. I saw the pattern. I didn't say anything. I just updated Schedule C. Schedule C was the clause in my original agreement that governed what happened to ARIA's core architecture in the event of unauthorized ownership transfer. I'd had it drafted years earlier when I was naive enough to think I'd never need it, but cautious enough to include it anyway. When I quietly amended it, with legal counsel, fully above board, I added a provision: any transfer of ARIA's licensing rights or core codebase that did not include my biometric authorization within a 96-hour window would trigger a staged lockdown. The hospitals would keep access to their existing licensed versions, but the master codebase, the update pipeline, the training data, the cloud infrastructure, all of it would go into a read-only vault that only I could open. My lawyer asked me if I really wanted to include that. I said yes. She asked if I thought it would ever come up. I said I genuinely hoped it wouldn't. She filed it. The son-in-law never read Schedule C. I know this because 8 months later, he signed a full asset transfer to a new holding company, one he controlled without consulting me, without notifying me, and without even a phone call. He sent a single email to our board at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, while I was at my daughter's hockey game in Mississauga, announcing that the IP restructuring had been completed and that NovaMed was entering a new phase of growth. I found out from my daughter's coach, of all people, who happened to be married to someone on the NovaMed board. She pulled me aside after the final buzzer and said, "Hey, did something happen at your company today? My husband's been on calls all night." I checked my email in the parking lot. Read the announcement. Read it again. Drove home. Made tea. sat at my kitchen table, and opened the Schedule C monitoring dashboard. The lockdown had already started, automated, exactly as designed. I want to be clear about something. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt tired. 11 years of work, and it had come to this. A parking lot in Mississauga, reading an email from a man who'd never written a line of code in his life, telling me that the thing I'd built now belonged to a shell company. I went to bed. The call came at 7:15 a.m. It was the son-in-law. He didn't say good morning. "The system is down," he said. "The hospital feeds are locked. What did you do?" I was still in my kitchen, coffee in hand. I said, "Good morning." "Don't. Tell me what you did." "I didn't do anything," I said, which was technically accurate. I'd done everything 8 months earlier. The system responded to an unauthorized ownership transfer. That's Schedule C. Did legal walk you through Schedule C? There was a pause. What is Schedule C? And there it was. I told him I'd be happy to send over the relevant sections, that my lawyer would be in touch, and that in the meantime, the 14 hospital networks currently unable to push updates to their diagnostic systems might want to know there was a resolution timeline. I kept my voice completely neutral. I'd had a long time to practice this conversation in my head. He escalated immediately. Within an hour, I had a call from Novamed's general counsel, who was professional and clearly had not slept. She'd read Schedule C by then. I could tell by the way she paused before every sentence. "The provision appears to be valid," she said. "It is," I said. "The board is going to want to discuss options." "I'm available," I said, "but I want to be direct with you. The hospitals are my first concern. I can restore update access to the licensed networks within the hour if we agree on a temporary freeze of the transfer pending legal review." She said she'd call me back in 20 minutes. She called back in 12. By noon, the transfer had been formally suspended. The son-in-law had been pulled from the IP working group, and I was on a call with Roger himself, the first time we'd spoken one-on-one in almost a year. He sounded exhausted, older than I remembered. He said, "I didn't know about the transfer, not the specifics." I believed him. I still do. "I know," I said. He told me it was a tax efficiency structure, that you'd been consulted. I hadn't. Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you need?" Roger asked. That was the question I'd been turning over for months. What did I need? I needed to not be working in a company where the next generation of leadership thought ARIA was a line item to be restructured into a holding company. I needed my name on the patents to mean something. I needed, honestly, to not spend the next 5 years watching someone gut a diagnostic tool that was saving lives at hospitals in New Brunswick and British Columbia because it made a cleaner balance sheet for an MBA's first year in charge. But I didn't say any of that. I said, I need the original joint ownership structure reinstated, in writing, with a board resolution. I need the holding company transfer voided, and I need my team's reporting lines restored to direct. Roger said he'd need a few days. I said I understood. "And if that happens," he said carefully, "you'll restore the full system?" "Immediately," I said. He said thank you. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry it got this far." I said, "Me too." Those few days turned into 10. I won't pretend they were comfortable. There were emails from lawyers I'd never heard of, calls from board members I'd met once at a Christmas party, one genuinely baffling message from someone claiming to represent stakeholder interests that I forwarded to my lawyer without responding. The son-in-law, I was told secondhand, was arguing that Schedule C was unenforceable. His legal team apparently spent 4 days trying to make that case before quietly dropping it. The board resolution came on a Wednesday afternoon. I read every line. My lawyer read every line. We asked for 2 amendments, got one, accepted the other as reasonable. I opened the vault at 4:47 p.m. Every hospital network restored within 6 minutes. My phone buzzed with a notification from our system monitor, all 14 networks showing green. I set the phone down and looked out the window of my home office. February in Toronto. The sky was that flat gray that lasts from November until it doesn't anymore. My coffee had gone cold. The son-in-law resigned 3 weeks later. The announcement called it a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. He went to work for a private equity firm in Calgary, which, if you know anything about private equity, is either a promotion or an exile depending on your perspective. I genuinely don't know which one it was for him. I don't spend much time thinking about it. Roger brought in an external COO 6 months after that. Someone who'd actually run a health tech operation before. She asked to meet me in her first week. We sat in the NovaMed boardroom with bad coffee from the machine in the hallway, and she asked me straight out, "Is there anything about the way this company works that's going to bite us in 2 years that I should know about now?" I liked her immediately. I told her about Schedule C. All of it. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. "Smart," she said when I finished. "Paranoid," I said. "Same thing in this industry." She's still there. NovaMed is doing fine. Araya is currently in deployment at 19 hospital networks with a pilot running in 3 rural health authorities in Northern Ontario. The kind of places that can't staff a full radiology team overnight, where the AI isn't a nice-to-have. It's the thing that catches what nobody else is awake to catch. I still work there. Different title now, more focused on research, less on the politics. I have an office that looks out at a parking structure, which is not glamorous, but the hours are reasonable and I can get to my daughter's hockey games. Here's what I learned. And I'm only telling you this because I've thought about it long enough to mean it. I didn't win because I was smarter than him. I won because I took the threat seriously before it became an emergency. The son-in-law was predictable. People who get power through connection rather than competence are almost always predictable. They move fast because they know somewhere underneath the confidence that they're on borrowed time. They cut corners because they've never had to build anything from scratch and don't understand that the corners are structural. I understood that corners are structural. I built every single one. Schedule C was never about revenge. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't a trap I set, it was a lock I installed because I'd done enough work to know the work was worth protecting. The difference matters. Revenge is reactive. Preparation is quiet and patient, and, when it works, it looks like the universe just happened to be fair for once. The universe isn't usually fair. That's why you write it into the contract. My daughter asked me once, around that time, why I always kept copies of everything. Old drafts, version histories, legal correspondence going back 15 years, all of it organized in folders on an external drive that I back up every Sunday. She was 12 at the time, doing a school project on something, needed to print a document and couldn't find a cable. I said, because the work is the evidence, and the evidence is the work. She said, that doesn't make sense, Dad. She's probably right, but the drive is still there, still backed up every Sunday. And on a cold Wednesday afternoon in February, when the little green lights came back on across 14 hospital networks, I knew exactly what I had, where it was, and whose name was on it. That was enough. I've thought about that February afternoon more times than I can count. Not the legal win, not the board resolution, not even the 14 green lights blinking back on across the monitor. What I keep coming back to is the parking lot in Mississauga. The cold air, my daughter's hockey bag in the trunk, reading that email under a sodium lamp at 9 p.m. and feeling, more than anything else, just tired. I think about what it actually took to get through that. Not the technical part, not Schedule C, but the years before it. 11 years of showing up and doing the work correctly when nobody was watching, not cutting corners on the diagnostic thresholds because a faster model would have looked better in a demo. Not signing away rights I didn't fully understand because a lawyer made the paperwork feel urgent. Doing the thing the right way, even when the slower right way was inconvenient. That's not heroic. That's just what integrity looks like on a Tuesday when there's nothing dramatic at stake. It compounds quietly, and you don't notice it compounding until the moment you actually need it. What I've come to understand is that the son-in-law didn't lose because he was unlucky. He lost because he'd spent his whole career moving fast across surfaces he'd never had to build. He didn't read Schedule C because he didn't think a contract clause filed by an engineer could possibly matter more than the org chart he'd spent 18 months rearranging. He confused authority with understanding. Those are different things. Authority can be given. Understanding has to be earned, slowly, through the kind of patient attention that doesn't show up in an MBA program. I don't say this with contempt. I say it because I see it clearly now in a way I couldn't at the time. The people who take shortcuts through the years are the ones who find walls at the finish line. And the walls aren't punishments. They're just the natural consequence of what was never actually built. The perseverance piece is the part I think gets underestimated. It wasn't one hard decision. It was 1,000 small ones. Staying at NovaMed through 2 rounds of restructuring, rebuilding the team after the contractor experiment, keeping Araya's accuracy standards high when the board was asking about margins. Each of those decisions was a choice to invest in the work rather than protect my own comfort. That accumulation is what made Schedule C possible. You can't protect something you haven't genuinely built. If there's anything I'd want my daughter to take from all of this, and she's heard the short version, not the whole thing, it's that the work itself is the security. Not the title, not the office, not the relationships with people who have power today and may not have it next year. The work, done with care and honesty over a long enough period, becomes something nobody else can simply sign away. That's not guaranteed, but it's the closest thing to a guarantee that actually exists. The new COO asked me once if I'd do anything differently. I thought about it for a real moment before answering. I said I'd have filed Schedule C 2 years earlier. She laughed. I wasn't entirely joking.